save in gold, and secondarily, in smaller amounts in silver. Although I think at this point, silver may be a better speculative vehicle because it is relatively cheap, much cheaper than gold.
If we could, before we leave this topic, if we could touch one more, something you just mentioned in passing a couple times there is the propensity, kind of the natural bent of humans like animals to work hard and save for the future against hard times ahead. In order to do that, as you pointed out, it's important to know what you're saving with and what you're saving in. Something that's durable, non-perishable is going to maintain purchasing power, and why fiat currencies are not. They're proven to not be a good candidate for that. Can you talk just a little bit more on that topic before we move on?
Yeah. You should try to produce more than you consume and save the difference, but save in gold and secondarily in smaller amounts in silver. Although I think at this point, silver may be a better speculative vehicle because it is relatively cheap, much cheaper than gold. And I'm interested in cryptocurrencies and have been involved in them for about 5 or 6 years, and they've been very, very good to me. But most of them are crap. There's 18 or 20,000 of them. Most of them are going to go to zero. But I think Bitcoin is going to be fine, and a few others are going to be okay. They've got a lot of advantages as money, and that'll come to the fore as governments in desperation try to digitize their national currencies, which will just make the situation worse from absolutely every point of view. So I'm still a fan of Bitcoin and a very few others.
We've had, you mentioned also near the end of your previous section talking about commodities as a place you see of promise in the next leg of this financial confusion that we're wandering through together. And food is one of the things, or stuff that's used to produce food, are some of the things that people are concerned about. We've seen already sharply increasing prices in foodstuffs and are told from farmers who see those producer prices months and months before the consumers eventually affected by them, saying that you haven't seen anything yet, perhaps food prices doubling yet this year, et cetera. In the face of that, we've also had this mysterious rash of disasters at large food producing facilities, whether it's fires, et cetera. Could you talk to us about commodities in general and food or other vital commodities in specific, and any concerns you have about the availability and the ability to continue to either own or invest in those going forward? So if you could just start out with the general commodities approach.
Well, the last time or two we've talked, I'm sure that I've mentioned a lot on commodities from the bullish side, which I am. And as we speak, corn and wheat and soybeans are all pretty close to their all-time highs. And all the commodities, the food commodities, have, they've about doubled. They've reached a new plateau level, so that I'd say that everything from sugar, coffee, cocoa, all of the commodities have kind of elevated to a new equilibrium level that we're going to look back on. So how bullish am I on food commodities at this point? Well, not as bullish as I was a year ago because they've all doubled. But I'm still bullish, looking to sell puts on them, basically. But that's one thing. So where can you go to hide? Well, look, the higher something gets, the riskier it gets when we're talking about commodities. Because the cure for a bear market is, well, look, high prices are the cure for high prices, okay? So let's say if wheat and corn and soybeans, the big three, all doubled tomorrow morning, farmers would do anything they could to plant fence row to fence row and bring in bumper crops of all these things, okay? So are we going to have, getting back to the practical side of this, Are we going to have food shortages worldwide? Well, this is hard to predict. We can talk about so many things. We can talk about the fact that corn production or the yields per acre have approximately quadrupled over the last 50 years. And is that progress going to continue? Well, I can give you a bull case and a bear case, but I can tell you this, that fertilizer and pesticides are important components of growing mass industrial crops, big monocultures. And the price of these things have all tripled in the last couple of years, tripled. And that kind of, farmers have to put that money up front to grow and to grow their crops. So a lot of them are cutting back, yields might fall. We're kind of in a twilight zone as we speak. But here's the big problem. It's that the more stressed the average guy gets with what he's got to pay for his beef, and incidentally, I'm bullish on cattle more than anything else right now, but another story. But the more stress the average guy has paying for stuff at the grocery, the more likely it is for politicians to try to do something. And whenever the government tries to do something, they absolutely make things worse every time. There's been talk by these idiots about putting on wage and price controls particularly because people have been losing ground in wages so much they can't do that. But price controls, and they'll try it on oil first. They'll try it on everything, which will just create shortages. So, and the fact that government is so much more powerful and so much more important now than it's ever been means that the potential for disaster is so much greater than it's ever been in the past. The solution to these problems, of course, is getting rid of the state. I mean, not just cutting it back. I mean, abolishing most of the government agencies that we have in the U.S. and most countries have, and not just pulling them out by their roots, but putting Agent Orange in the soil where they grew, if you want to talk about agriculture. But that's not going to happen. So I don't know if that's an answer to the question or not, Donovan.
Anticipating the potential for a major conflagration, whether you call it World War III, what kinds of preparedness steps? You've already mentioned people trying to accumulate capital in a durable form, and also located in a jurisdiction or jurisdictions that seem to be the least unfavorable to your freedoms and privacy. Additional thoughts that you have for people making preparedness for hard times ahead?
Well, if you live in a major city, don't. I'd go to a small town, go rural. Not suburbs, but rural, a small town, if you're in a position to do so. Unfortunately, most people aren't in a position to do so. So I wish them well, but I think they're in trouble. So that's one thing you should do. You should become more self-sufficient. You should, set aside a whole bunch of things that are essential as much as you can. Food and basic commodities and weapons and things of this nature. Can't go wrong doing that.
And as you've relocated, how does that play in? Because often people get a little bit confused as they're trying to make preparedness, trying to set aside stores of food or other supplies, and then they think about relocating. It's a real logistical challenge, thinking, if I have my stuff here, do we have caches of stuff in multiple places? I mean, what does that fit into your overall philosophy about being an international man?
Well, look, it's a question of your personal financial posture. So if you don't have any money, you have to adopt a different methodology. Like, one of my, he's a pretty old friend of mine at this point, is a professional hobo. He owns nothing. And he travels light, and he's as happy as can be. It's a whole other story about how you live with nothing and do well and be happy. Well, that's not the path that I've chosen. So, I've got how many? Way too many places to live in different countries and all that. And they present their own problems because you have to maintain them and you have to, pay people. This is just a problem of being alive.
As we've talked about it with various guests and even my wife and I and our family members amongst ourselves, you realize that there may be no one perfect answer. You just try to find a pathway that's going to be workable for you. But definitely the process of thinking it through, talking it through, and taking some first steps does bear fruit. It gets you more prepared. I can't remember whose quote it was that any plan that you have itself is probably worthless, but the action of planning is priceless. So the actual process that you go through and the thought processes that it gets you prepared for being more flexible in the event of different things that might occur.
Well, you're absolutely right, because most people just don't think about the future. They live life from day to day, which is okay. But Clausewitz said, beginning of the 19th century, he said, no battle plan survives first contact with the enemy. And Mike Tyson kind of updated that with, everybody's got a plan till they get punched in the mouth. And that's kind of the way it is. So, but yeah, nonetheless, it's good to have a plan. Not having a plan is a bad idea.